One of the foundational recommendations for better health is moving more frequently. And today we're going to talk about why movement is health. And as you start to lose your ability to move, you start to lose your health. I'm Dr. Jeff Cumro, and ultimately what we do is we work to increase brain function, we work to optimize body function, and then when we can supply the energy to those areas, then we get the outcome that we want. It doesn't matter if we're in a learning environment, if we're in a business environment, if we're playing sports, if we're trying to sleep, whatever that is, we're getting the information that we need to get us to our goals. So ultimately, why is motion so important? It's one of the recommendations. You look at everything they talk about exercise, and it's easy to look at exercise and say it's the cardiovascular benefits, or it's the breathing benefits to it, or whatever. And those are all important, right? What we're doing with that is we're getting an energetic improvement. We're getting energy optimization. As we start to need more energy, our body puts forth the different things that will make more energy. So it kind of spirals in the right direction in that. But when we look at the body itself, our body requires movement. And there are organisms that are in the sea that they don't need to move, right? They've got all of their nutrients and everything like that go floating past them. They don't need to move. So what they do is when they're born, they have a brain, and they go around and they find a spot where they're going to live for the rest of their life. They plant themselves onto that thing, and basically the mechanisms that they have basically cement them onto that so they don't ever move, and then they absorb their brain. They don't need the brain anymore because they don't have to do anything to go and search for food. All the food comes to them. What the brain allows us to do is basically try things to reach whatever goals we want to move, or to whatever goals we want to achieve, right? So whether we're looking to, move in a better way, whether we're looking for food, which is ultimately what it originated as, or whether we're working to, optimize, whatever area of our life, it's ultimately giving us the information that we need to make a decision. That brain is sending it down saying, hey, do this, see how this works. And then we have feedback mechanisms that say, all right, this worked, this didn't work, this is how far we were off, this is what we need to do. And then it goes back and forth. We learn through that, right? But it's ultimately our body that is doing it. Our movement is a necessary key to this. So when we send a signal from the elbow, it goes up to that brain, and it's sending all of these different signals in there. It sends signals to not only how you move, like it sends signals to the muscles, it sends signals to the sensory systems to feel where you're at in space. This is why if you close your eyes, you kind of still know where your arms and legs are. You still have that sense there. We're watching with that, so our eyes are sending back sensory mechanisms. Our vestibular system, the part that senses motion, so if you get vertigo, that's the vestibular system. It's sending down signals because as you move your eyes, the vestibular system starts. So all of these different systems are based off of that movement. And if we don't have that movement, it's hard to attune all of those systems. If you don't have so the way to look at this is if you have a rifle and you sight that rifle in, you can hit the target every single time, right? Well, maybe you can't. I know I couldn't, but there are people that could, right? So if we put a device and it's sitting there and you have it sighted in, it's going to hit the target every single time. If we don't have that rifle sighted in, you might end up with a shot that's 3 feet short. If you just wildly make a change and you don't look where it's at, you might end up 3 feet left or 3 feet high or 3 feet to the right or whatever. You're just kind of blindly shooting to see what happens, right? We've got to get everything sighted in, and that is ultimately what movement does for us, and it tunes our body and our brain together. And as we get that sensory impact, as we get that motor impact, they work back and forth together to help us get our goals. So if you are not moving enough, or if you're losing range of motion, this is where chiropractic care is so important. Chiropractic care ultimately kind of resets those joints. So it's kind of like if you go back to your breaker box. If you have a breaker that flips, your house isn't quite as functional, right? You might plug it into an outlet and works or it doesn't work, right? You go to a different outlet, it may or may not work. And you kind of go through this. Your house is not as functional as what it should be. So as we start to flip those breakers back on, we start to get more functional. And that's ultimately what chiropractic is doing for motion. It's doing that to send sensation up to the brain so the brain gets the optimal information that it needs to send information back down to help you reach your goals. So that's ultimately what we're doing. If you look at the breaker box, that's chiropractic in a nutshell. We're turning things back on so you are more functional, but movement is a very key part of that. If you start to lose any of that range of motion, then it has an inflammatory aspect. You put down scar tissue on that. That scar tissue limits the range of motion that you can move through, and that starts degeneration, it starts inflammation, it starts all these other pathways. As you get more and more inflammation in those joints, you start to get more and more scar tissue. That more and more scar tissue limits it even further, and it starts to spiral. And this is where you get arthritis. This is where things get fused together. Like the body can actually lay down enough bone in arthritis that it fuses two areas together, and you can no longer break that joint free, right? So this is a very, very important thing. This is ultimately the health of the joints, but it's so much more than the health of the joints. It's also what sends the signals to your brain to help you get the optimal input, or the optimal output rather. If you're getting the inputs that you need to determine where you're at in space, to determine what is going on in your environment, then you can send the proper signals down from the brain. And that right there is why movement is so important. And there's different recommendations for how much movement you need. Some people will say, it's 150 minutes a week. Some people will say, 30 minutes every day. Ultimately, find something that works for you, right? You've got to find something that works for you, and you can work with your doctor. I'm happy to work with you on this if that's something that you so need, but we've got to look at what we could do to take each joint through a full range of motion, because when we don't have joints going through that full range of motion, that's where we start to fall apart. And I don't know if you have experienced this in your life, but as I've gotten older, everybody's told me a different age of when things start falling apart. They're like 35, things start falling apart, 40, things start, whatever age it is. But the things in my life that I have lost is because I stopped doing something. So as soon as I start doing that activity again, that thing starts to come back. And everybody else is the same. We can all start to do these types of things that they start to bring back those capabilities that we once had and we've lost. So, you don't want to necessarily run every single day. You don't necessarily want to play basketball you want to do something that is going to give you enough flexibility where you're moving in all of those different planes, and you're getting that motion that you need to move through all areas of motion. So all ranges of motion, flexion, extension, rotation, all of that good stuff. You want to take that joint through a full range of motion to get your optimal outcomes. So obviously, if you have questions on this, drop a comment, send us a message, whatever you need to do, get it out to me, and I'm happy to help you through this as much as I possibly can. As always, like or subscribe if this is helpful to you. It gives me good information as what you guys find beneficial, so I can share more of that stuff. So as always, I appreciate your time. I know that your attention is the most valuable resource, and I do appreciate that. So I will catch you next week. Until then, find some way that you can get some motion in your life.